Almost 3,000 people were shot in the city of Chicago last year. Men, women, small children, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups. Many hundreds of them died. Not a single one of those people received anything like the attention the media have lavished on a relatively minor assault alleged by the television actor Jussie Smollett. On the other hand, none of Chicago's 3,000 shootings was even half as useful as Smollett's story. His story had everything. The national media long ago gave up the pretense of gathering news. Journalism is now explicitly a political job. The point of it is to enforce cultural orthodoxies and punish enemies. Jussie Smollett was the perfect vehicle for both of those things. Journalists pretended to be horrified as they recounted what he said happened to him, but secretly, they were thrilled.
There are many indications of a hate crime here. They are looking for two suspects who were apparently wearing Make America Great Again hats, though that has not yet been officially confirmed.
We don't know what happened to Jussie, but what we do know is that racism is alive and well in this country. There is real evidence of people who have done these crimes who cite that the president has inspired them.
The fact that they reportedly said this is MAGA country adds to sort of the atmosphere of menace that African Americans in particular and people of color in general have felt since the advent of the Trump administration.
And the media has really cast so much doubt on his story, which I find so personally offensive, that a gay black man is targeted and then suddenly he becomes the victim of people's disbelief. Why? It's so outrageous to me.
He said his attackers hurled racial and homophobic slurs at him. And this is America in 2019.
This is America in 2019. To the national media, Smollett's story was the perfect metaphor for the Trump era. It was also, pretty clearly, a total crock. Smollett's account began to fall apart within hours. After a series of leaks from the obviously skeptical Chicago Police Department, Smollett's handlers paired him with a network anchor they could rely on to launder the hoax. In the end, Smollett sat for 16 and a half minutes with Robin Roberts of Good Morning America. Roberts surely knew there was ample evidence that Smollett was lying, but she decided to ignore that. Instead, Roberts colluded with him. She nodded empathetically as Smollett wept on camera. She asked no significant follow-up questions. The two parted like old friends. Both Smollett and Roberts turned out to be talented actors. Check out their performance on YouTube before it's scrubbed. You'll never watch ABC News again. Virtually every word they utter is dishonest. Smollett began by explaining that the men who attacked him were not muggers. They didn't want money. They assaulted him purely because of his identity as a gay black Democrat. People like Jussie Smollett aren't allowed to live in Donald Trump's America. That was the message of the attackers. This is MAGA country, they screamed. They were referring, of course, to Chicago, a city where 88% of the population voted against Donald Trump. As a crime story, it didn't make a lot of sense. And when skeptics on the internet raised basic questions about his story, Smollett attacked them as racist.
If I had said it was a Muslim or a Mexican or someone black, I feel like the doubters would have supported me a lot more. And that says a lot about the place that we are in our country right now. The fact that we have these fear mongrels, these people that are trying to separate us, and it's just not okay.
What you just heard is a near-perfect inversion of the truth. As Smollett himself might have put it, who exactly is the fear mongrel here? Who is dividing us? And who exactly is the victim in all of this? Well, Smollett claims that he's the victim. He tells us that he represents the most despised and unfashionable groups in America. That's why bigots doubt his story. The rest of us nod as if this were true because we're required to do that. That's how dishonest our society has become. Everyone must lie all the time. We know the rules. We have no choice. Meanwhile, our leaders immediately jumped to the defense of this supposedly unpopular person before even hearing the evidence. Within hours, at least two presidential candidates had described what happened to Smollett as a, quote, attempted lynching. They assumed on faith that he must be telling the truth. By definition, they smeared anyone who doubted him. They called him a hero. Is this the treatment that marginalized people receive? No, hardly. Smollett isn't powerless, far from it. His power lies in pretending that he has no power. In fact, Jussie Smollett and his promoters are the aggressors in this story. They launched a calculated campaign of slander against an entire group of people who have far less wealth and far less cultural influence than they have. If there's a bias crime here, they committed it. Will anyone be held accountable for this? Don't bet on it. In 1987, Al Sharpton introduced the media to a young woman called Tawana Brawley. Brawley had an awful story to tell. She said she'd been viciously raped by a group of racist white men and left in a garbage bag. She was covered in feces with racial slurs scrawled on her body. The Brawley case dominated headlines across the country for more than a year, and it bitterly divided New York City along ethnic lines. People hated each other because of what Tawana Brawley said happened to her. But it was all a lie. After conducting hundreds of interviews, a grand jury declared the entire story fraudulent. None of it actually happened. Brawley fled the state. A judge ordered Al Sharpton to pay for damages for accusing innocent men of rape. That should have been the end of Al Sharpton's career, yet just the opposite happened. Before he promoted Tawana Brawley's lie, Sharpton was best known as a small-time hustler, an FBI informant from Brooklyn, a man who'd once been James Brown's road manager. After he perpetuated the single most destructive racial hoax in memory, Al Sharpton got a promotion. He became a world-famous civil rights leader. He ran for president. He became a policy advisor to Barack Obama. According to visitor logs, Al Sharpton was invited to the Obama White House more than 80 times. He got his own show on MSNBC, which he still has. Sharpton has never apologized or even acknowledged the harm he did to this country by lying about Tawana Brawley. No one has forced him to. The lesson of Al Sharpton was clear to everyone watching. There are no penalties for hate hoaxes. There are only rewards. Not surprisingly, there have been many more since. The incident escalated dramatically after the 2016 election. The Muslim student in Louisiana who claimed she was assaulted by racists in Trump hats. The Muslim woman in San Diego who alleged the same. An anti-Asian attack in Minnesota, an anti-gay attack in California, a racial attack in Delaware, racist graffiti at the Air Force Academy, anti-Semitic threats phoned into Jewish community centers. All fake. Those and many, many more. The much-hyped epidemic of hate crimes you've heard so much about essentially is made up. The premise is absurd. America is not a hateful country. It's the most welcoming place on earth. That's why, even as our children learn from their teachers what a bigoted country this is, millions continue to stream in from Africa and Latin America for a better life here. It's why we've welcomed more refugees and immigrants than any nation in history. It's why we rescued a young Ilhan Omar from a refugee camp in Kenya. We are kind people. You see it in your own life. How many violent racists do you know personally? None, probably. That's because there aren't many in America. The left has to invent them. Stoking race hatred ensures continued power for the Democratic Party. Divided populations are easier to manipulate and rule. There would be no Democratic coalition without racial animosity. It's what holds their constituencies together. That's the point of identity politics. It's why they're forever reopening the wound. It's why Al Sharpton is still a revered figure among Democratic office holders. But the cost to the country has been high. Ask the kids from Covington Catholic. For the crime of having unfashionable political beliefs and skin color, a group of entirely innocent high school students came close to having their lives destroyed. That didn't happen by accident. The national media did it. They concocted a hate crime out of nothing. The Twitter mob then demanded that those boys be expelled from school and marked for life. Their parents were threatened. Their classmates were harassed. After 2 days, video surfaced proving that none of it was real. The mob moved on. But what if exculpatory video had not emerged? CNN panels would still be screaming for their blood. You sometimes hear people wonder why the media never seem to learn anything from moments like these, moments when they're exposed as corrupt and reckless. And so the answer to that question is very simple. It never occurs to them that they may be wrong or that they might have something to learn. The media see themselves as teachers, not as students. If you ever tried to put a sleepy 4-year-old into a snowsuit before school, you know how journalists feel about the audience. It's frustrating when children don't understand or obey, but you've got to keep trying. That's how they feel. Listen as that oily media reporter kid from CNN explains that the Jussie Smollett hoax does not in any way reflect poorly on the people who promoted it.
Perhaps the questioning was not tough enough on Good Morning America, but ultimately this is not about the media or about politicians or activists or any of the people that might have been fooled. It's about Jussie.
Oh, yeah. It's about Jussie. It definitely has nothing to do with any of us in the media who uncritically repeated his lies night after night for political effect. It's Jussie's problem now. That's Nancy Pelosi's new position, too, by the way. Almost immediately after Smollett's story hit the newswires, the Speaker of the House denounced the racist and homophobic attack. Quote, "May we all commit to ending this hate once and for all." Pelosi has since deleted that tweet. She has not apologized for her own role in perpetuating that hate. Pelosi should apologize, and not simply because it's good manners. Hate hoaxes make ethnic groups fear and distrust each other. That's a dangerous thing to do in a country that's becoming more diverse by the day. The only way to prevent future Tawana Brawleys and Jussie Smolletts is for the people who've promoted these lies to acknowledge what they've done, ask for forgiveness for doing it, and pledge to stop judging others on the basis of racial stereotypes. We need to resolve the Jussie Smollett story. We can't just move on to the next thing and act like it never happened, which is their plan. Smollett himself made that point, actually, at the end of his interview on Good Morning America. Watch.
I still want to believe, with everything that has happened, that there's something called justice.
We've got that in common. Something called justice. We all want to believe in that.
You know, as I look out into the crowd, I just wish that the families of gun violence in this city got this much attention, because that's who really deserves the amount of attention that we're giving to this particular incident. So this morning, I come to you not only as the superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, but also as a black man who spent his entire life living in the city of Chicago. I know the racial divide that exists here. I know how hard it's been for our city and our nation to come together. And I also know the disparities, and I know the history. This announcement today recognizes that Empire actor Jussie Smollett took advantage of the pain and anger of racism to promote his career. I'm left hanging my head and asking why. Why would anyone, especially an African-American man, use the symbolism of a noose to make false accusations? How could someone look at the hatred and suffering associated with that symbol and see an opportunity to manipulate that symbol to further his own public profile? Bogus police reports cause real harm. They do harm to every legitimate victim who's in need of support by police and investigators, as well as the citizens of this city. And I'm also angry. I love the city of Chicago and the Chicago Police Department, warts and all. But this publicity stunt was a scar that Chicago didn't earn and certainly didn't deserve. Smollett attempted to gain attention by sending a false letter that relied on racial, homophobic, and political language. When that didn't work, Smollett paid $3,500 to stage this attack and drag Chicago's reputation through the mud in the process. And why? This stunt was orchestrated by Smollett because he was dissatisfied with his salary. So he concocted a story about being attacked. I only hope that the truth about what happened receives the same amount of attention that the hoax did.
It's hard to top that, so I'm not even going to try. Jussie Smollett now faces a felony charge for filing a false report claiming that he was a victim. This after weeks of wasting the hard work of a dozen detectives, resources diverted from actual victims. So what's the lesson at CNN? All about lunch.
Sean Hannity's going to eat Jussie Smollett's lunch every single second. Tucker Carlson is going to eat Jussie Smollett's lunch every single second.
President of the United
President
States.
of the United States is going to eat his lunch.
What about the five? We want to eat lunch, too. So that's Lemon's concern that the reaction to the crime is worse than the crime itself. Notice I'm not saying hoax. A hoax removes the media's complicity. No, it was a crime aided and abetted by the activist press, who embraced their perfect victim, ignoring all those implausible details. So, Don, no one is interested in eating Smollett's lunch, but will eat yours, and that of the whole consensus media, who need a lesson in restraint in resisting its own activistic confirmation bias. Lemon's made it no secret that he believes Trump supporters are racist, which is how Smollett portrayed them. So forget Smollett. He was just serving a function for the thirsty press seeking that story. Smollett, an attention addict with an anti-Trump fever, he read the room and saw that it was going to be easy to fool the media. And he saw all of those sympathizing friends, like Don Lemon, as suckers. They should be pissed off at him. But he couldn't fool the cops, or most of us. So if your only lesson is that Smollett will be used as fodder at this network, while missing the fact that he played you, then you're as hopeless as we thought. You should have been thrilled that the demand for hate crime exceeds the supply. And that you don't means that it'll probably happen again. Hey, Emily, you are a prosecutor. What are the legal ramifications of this entire case? Lay it out for us.
Well, for filing the false police report, he could face, as we've heard, up to 3 years in prison and then a huge fine. And then for that letter, you know, there are consequences to the huge mechanism of responses that is put in place when you file a false police report and you allege a hate crime, or you send a letter with a threatening letter to a corporation building that then deploys a hazmat team, et cetera. So for that, he could face up to 10 years in prison. But I want to point out what I loved so much about the superintendent's comments.
Eddie Johnson, yeah.
He brought it back to the real world, which is that there are real world consequences. And the hubris to me that emanates out of Hollywood, where this celebrity will take something so painfully large, such as the strife that has plagued Chicago and this country in terms of its racial divide and the historical consequences and symbolism of that news, to shine for his own selfish gain because of a paycheck. That, to me, is, I just loved the speech by the superintendent because I felt like he brought it home to the real world. He said, this isn't TV. This is what happens.
Juan, he said he did it, or they claim it was because he was just dissatisfied with his paycheck. Right. Do you believe that?
I don't know what to believe, but I mean, that's what the chief said.
The chief did it. What were your thoughts on what he said?
Oh, I like the chief. Yeah. You know, I mean, and I think that he was very clear that in part of his disappointment was as a black man in seeing Smollett take advantage of the racial tensions in American society. But again, it's all about him. It wasn't about anybody else but him. I will say this, when the chief said he'd like to see more attention paid to things like the shooting in Chicago or what else, or especially to as much attention to the initial charge as to the finding that this young man lied about it, the chief's wrong. All the analysis shows that there's more attention now to the idea that he lied because it's a conspiracy issue, it's a fraud issue, it's celebrity gossip. There's more and don't forget Donald Trump. Donald Trump has jumped in and said, you know, he was wrong, and it fits in with Donald Trump's attacks on the media, so all the Trump crowd is celebrating this in a way that
they're vindicated.
No, they're not. They're
vindicated.
Yeah. Who said there was any need for them?
They were accused. They were the symbolic accused.
No, he said he put a red hat on one, but that wasn't the heart of the charge.
He also
and the letter was
said they were white.
He was the victim of some kind of racial crime. And again, there's so many racial crimes. We've seen a spike in racial crimes in the country.
Yeah.
And this guy Smollett, is so narcissistic that he is out of touch with reality. And the chief should know, more media attention, more cameras at that police department today than ever before.
Well, we can talk to the end of time about your misinterpretation of the facts. Let's go to GMA and get Smollett's own words before I get to Jussie.
Why do you think you were targeted?
I can just assume, I mean, I come really, really hard against 45. I come really, really hard against his administration. And I don't hold my tongue. If I had said it was a Muslim or a Mexican or someone black, I feel like the doubters would have supported me a lot much more.
See, Jussie, when I listen to him, I see somebody who knew how to play the media. because the media could be, that's the language that the media understood, if you're an activist media.
Right. He framed 60 million Trump supporters, and the media bought it hook, line, and sinker. Juan, I think what the chief was saying also is that he'd like to see that much media attention when there's a shooting or black-on-black violence or gang activity in the south side of Chicago, too. Now, Smollett makes reportedly from $400,000 to $1.1 million a year.
60 grand an episode, I believe.
He does not have any children, which means he is filthy rich. So instead of trying to earn more money working hard, he perpetrated this hoax, and everything he accused Donald Trump of, he himself is guilty of. He is a liar, he is corrupt, and he is greedy. So just let that sink in also. Real hate crimes now are going to be treated with more skepticism, unfortunately, and that's what the police chief said, and I think that's probably one of the biggest results of this. Also, how dumb does Robin Roberts look right now when she went out there, didn't ask him any follow-up questions, and let him perform like that? I bet she wished she had that back. Also, think about all the frame jobs and the conspiracy theories which we've seen. All it takes is a little common sense. You talked about it yesterday. There's a bunch of MAGA guys in a polar vortex in Chicago, hate criming people. Okay, Kavanaugh in high school, was he really participating in drug-fueled orgies? Or Covington, let's see, wait a second. A 16-year-old, 115-pound kid was confronting some adult like the Ku Klux Klan. And now Donald Trump, it makes you suspicious of the entire Russia investigation.
What?
Donald Trump is a Russian asset?
Holy
Donald
smokes.
Trump is a Russian asset. You don't have any sort of doubt when someone says that? If you don't believe that there's any sort of suspicion when someone says Trump is a Russian asset, you're crazy, and you're going to fall for another one of these hoaxes.
What about the U.S. landing on the moon? I think that calls this calls it into question.
Dana?
Oh my God.
Well, a couple of things. One, so he makes $65,000 an episode. His bail was just set at $100,000. So he's going to post bail with a week and a half's worth of work. I wonder how like the AOCs of the world feel about this filthy rich person being able to walk away free because, you know, right? We need bail reform. The other thing, though, I really like what Matt Lewis had to write today. I'm going to cite him because I couldn't say it better. He writes for the Daily Beast. He said that the desire for sympathy and the moral authority that comes from being victimized has replaced the desire for admiration or respect for some act of heroism. So it's like victim chic. If you are a victim, then you are going to get more attention, and he knew that. But I do think it's kind of bizarre, though. To your point, he was able to fool some in the media, not all. Remember, there was people on the left who were frustrated. Like GQ magazine wrote about the reporters in this case, saying how dare they use the word allegedly. That was whitewashing the idea that this was a hate crime when reporters were just actually doing their job.
By the way, Jesse, I think that with the Robin Roberts thing, we used the tape of the interview. I think that is an indication that she actually got this guy to say what he wanted to say, and for him, that's part of the indictment of him.
It's true. He set himself up.
That's what I'm saying. So I don't think that's the reporter.
Well, I think I would have asked a few more follow-ups. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
No offense to Robin.
You would have quizzed her on geography. And anyway.
Well, there's at least one big unanswered question in the case of Jussie Smollett tonight. Why did this happen? Why would a popular actor on a network TV show, someone who's rich and successful and famous, pay people to assault him and risk going to jail in the process? Well, at a press conference in Chicago today, the police superintendent wondered the same thing.
I'm left hanging my head and asking why. Why would anyone, especially an African-American man, use the symbolism of a noose to make false accusations? How could someone look at the hatred and suffering associated with that symbol and see an opportunity to manipulate that symbol to further his own public profile?
Well, that's a fair question. What Smollett did was not simply illegal and weird. It was terrible for the country. So why did he do it? Well, the short answer appears to be he wanted a raise at work, and he thought this would get him that. The broader answer, the one that we should all think about, meditate on, is that Smollett was simply responding to the incentives that American society has created for him. Smollett pretended to be a victim because we reward victims. We've decided that it's more heroic to suffer than it is to achieve. That's the message of our culture, our politics, our workplaces. Jussie Smollett was simply doing his best to get ahead according to the rules that others made. And in fact, had his hoax succeeded, there is no doubt Smollett would have been richly rewarded for it. He'd probably get a significant bump in pay and an extended segment on Colbert. He would have been a hero. So Jussie Smollett was not crazy. He knew exactly what he was doing. Faking a hate crime was an entrepreneurial move. In modern America, victimhood is power. That's why so many powerful people claim it. It's why Elizabeth Warren pretended to be an American Indian. It's why at every low point during the entire span of his political career, Barack Obama invoked bias. It's why so many politicians do the same today. I have suffered. You cannot criticize me. The academic left has constructed an entire theology around the holiness of victimhood. It's called intersectionality. It comes with an elaborate rating system in which every group in America is assessed according to how much it has suffered. The more your group says it has been discriminated against, the more moral authority you receive. It's a pretty good deal for a lot of people, and they have no interest in changing it. And that explains why so many on the left initially jumped to Jussie Smollett's defense. They weren't simply defending him, they were defending identity politics. We could give you any number of examples of this, but we'll skip ahead to the most nauseating one of all. Watch anchor Robin Roberts of ABC, quote, News, beam with joy after Smollett finishes the most dishonest performance of his life, and then tell him his lies are beautiful.
I still want to believe, with everything that has happened, that there's something called justice. Because if I stop believing that, then what's it all for? Thank you, Jussie.
Thank you, Jussie. Well, before he claimed that white supremacists beat him up on the street, most people had never heard of Jussie Smollett. And after he became a victim, everybody wanted to be his friend. Here's Don Lemon over on CNN bragging about how he texts his new pal Jussie every single day. He's got Jussie's cell number. That's how close they are, really tight.
My concern is for him.
Right, yeah. Right.
And for his well-being. Every day, I say, I know you think I'm annoying. I can show you a text. I know you think I'm annoying, but I just want to know that you're doing.
Oh, okay.
That you're okay.
Yeah.
If you need somebody, you can talk to me, because there are not a lot of us out there.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
Sometimes he responds, sometimes he doesn't. He responds and says, you are not annoying.
You can talk to me, Don Lemon says, because there aren't a lot of us out there. Well, here's the translation. Us means people who've been oppressed in the ways that Jussie Smollett has been oppressed. Lemon is letting you know that he's in that group too. Yes, he's a highly paid news anchor with his own TV show, and yet, like Jussie Smollett, Don Lemon is a holy victim. So there's a mad scramble over who's the victim here. Who is the victim? Well, there is one. What Smollett did was not a victimless crime. There's no such thing as that. An entire group of people did get slandered by this hoax. Regular people from outside the coastal cities. People with the wrong political beliefs and the wrong skin color. Smollett and his many defenders savagely attacked these people and are not apologizing for doing it. Instead, they're telling you, you hear this everywhere, that the real losers here are the authentic victims of hate crimes who won't be believed the next time. Okay, that's fine. But what about the innocent Americans they just poured venom on for 2 weeks because it matched some bigoted stereotype they had about middle America? What about them? There's no mention of them. Don Lemon would very much like to keep up those attacks on those people. Attacking them allows him to feel oppressed. That is why when Smollett was finally caught, Lemon reacted in a very puzzling way. He didn't seem especially concerned that his buddy had lied to further divide the country to hurt America, which he did. No, that wasn't the real problem. The real problem, according to Don Lemon, is that Smollett's arrest might discredit the cult of victimhood.
This is playing out every single moment in cable news. Sean Hannity's going to eat Jussie Smollett's lunch every single second. Tucker Carlson is going to eat Jussie Smollett's lunch every single second.
Yeah, because when you tell the truth about a hate hoax, you're the real hater. What's the cost of this attitude so floridly on display to our society? What does it do to us? Well, think of it this way. What would happen to your kids if you woke them up every morning by telling them that they were victims? No matter how hard they worked, people would always hate them just for who they are. What if you did that? Would that be good parenting? Would it make your kids stronger, happier, more successful? No, it wouldn't. And good parents would never do that. Good parents tell their kids to take responsibility for their lives, not to blame others, to work as hard as they can to overcome obstacles. That's what good parents of all races and all backgrounds tell their kids. And if you don't believe it, just ask 10 well-adjusted, accomplished people if their parents allowed them to feel like victims. Again, it doesn't matter where they're from or what they look like. Ask them. Did your parents tell you you're a victim? And not one of them will say yes. And yet we tell our citizens just the opposite. And you see the effects very clearly in the workplace, for example. In the years after the 2008 recession, there was an enormous surge of claims of workplace bias of all kinds. There is still no evidence that bigotry itself increased at all during those years. And yet when people felt threatened by a teetering economy, they knew that claiming victimhood status would give them an advantage. Can you blame them? No, you really can't. Not really. They didn't write the rules of our society. They're just following the rules that people like Don Lemon wrote, but at great cost. Piers Morgan is editor-at-large of DailyMail.com and a keen observer of everything that happens in the world. He joins us today. So, Piers, as a guy who's been in the news business for a long time, you must be wondering, why were the reporters following this the most credulous of all? Why didn't they smell a rat?
Well, it was the perfect storm, wasn't it, Tucker? This is where the victimhood culture that you so brilliantly articulated there meets Trump derangement syndrome, this disease which has afflicted so many, particularly liberal celebrities. And I think in Jussie Smollett, you had greed as a motivation, but you also had, he wanted to be a celebrity victim, as you said. He wanted people to feel sorry for him, to like him, to retweet him. But also he wanted to use the prism of his hatred for Donald Trump and all things Trump as the bedrock for this. They had to be two white Trump supporters in Making America Great caps who attacked him, because he knew that that would be the perfect vehicle to turn him into American hero. That actually, if he was attacked by Trump supporters who lynched him or tried to lynch him with a noose and really, you know, committed one of the worst hate crimes imaginable, then Jussie Smollett, would become a hero and he would be a heroic victim. And in fact, he went further. In the Robin Roberts interview, he said that he fought back against these two guys. Well, we've now seen the size of them. These are two very big men. And our hero, Jussie, fought back. So he's a victim, but a hero who also fought back. And I look at this whole story. I tweet every day, all day. And I write columns 2-3 times a week. I didn't say a word about this, Tucker, from the moment the story broke. I didn't know. Something about this stank from the moment it happened. And I just stayed very quiet. I waited and I watched and I waited and I watched. And all the time, more and more stuff came out, from him not releasing his phone to then releasing redacted records to so on and so on. And slowly but surely, the real story built up. But this guy had completely invented the whole attack. He'd staged it. He'd roped in his friends to do this. And I'm sorry, but I've already seen on social media people starting to feel sorry for this guy. You know, we should cut him some slack. He's got mental health issues. That's always the first refuse of excuse for this kind of behavior. He's not mentally ill. He's greedy. And he's somebody who was craving attention. And a lot of the media, as I think is very apparent from this story, a lot of the mainstream media in America have gone so full-on anti-Trump that they were prepared to suspend all journalistic integrity and credibility in the way they reported this story by just believing every word this guy said. And they did it, Tucker, because we're now in a culture where my truth is perceived to be the truth. And it's not. Time and again now we see people where their truth, their idea of the truth, is a complete lie. Jussie Smollett claimed to have been effectively lynched. Everybody followed up with this. All the top Democrats were tweeting, Kamala Harris to Cory Booker. It was a lynching. You know, they were trying to lynch this guy. But it wasn't. The only thing that was lynched was the truth.
That's right. And the press abetted it, the channel that you and I once worked at, among them. Piers Morgan, such a smart summation, as always. It's great to see you. Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
We've got more in this story. Now we'll be joined later in the show by Dan Bongino and Chadwick Moore for even more on why this happened, what it means, and what happens next. That's in just a bit. We live in the age of the woke billionaire. Bet you never thought you'd live to see that. We're seeing it. Why are the biggest winners in our economic system endorsing socialism for America? There's a reason for that, and we'll tell you what it is after the break.
After what?
2019 is only a couple months old. We haven't given it a name yet. So how about the year of the woke billionaire? Sit back and watch as the Democratic presidential candidates simultaneously jockey to establish the most left-wing possible credentials and at the very same time feverishly suck up to the super rich to fund their campaigns. We've seen some of this before, Tom Steyer and George Soros. Those are the obvious examples. But there are many, many, many more. On Saturday, just this past Saturday, coming Saturday, rather, Senator Cory Booker is attending a Silicon Valley fundraiser. It's hosted by Gary and Laura Lauder. They're heirs to the $14 billion Estee Lauder fortune. Kamala Harris just had a fundraiser in Beverly Hills that was attended by an army of wealthy studio execs. Kirsten Gillibrand didn't even start her campaign for president before asking the permission of Wall Street. So what's the message? Rich people are highly progressive now. And you can see why. They love mass immigration. It brings them servants. They support federally mandated snobbery masquerading as environmentalism. Abortion is essentially a sacrament to them, especially when practiced in poor neighborhoods. But here's the confusing part. These are, by definition, affluent people, and yet increasingly, confiscatory tax rates are a rallying cry for the Democratic Party. So why are billionaires so eager to back candidates who want to seize their assets to fund new entitlements? This is confusing. Here's one reason. Billionaires understand that they will never have to pay those taxes. Why? Because the top federal income tax rate stops at about $500,000. So what's the difference between someone making $500,000 a year and someone making $50 million a year? The answer? The richer one can much more easily evade paying full freight, and they do. This group makes far more of their money on capital gains, which are taxed at only half the rate of your salary, and some of it's not even taxed at all. Under the 2017 tax law, investments in federally designated opportunity zones evade capital gains taxes entirely. One such opportunity zone, by the way, is right by the Army-Navy Country Club in Arlington, Virginia, one of America's richest zip codes. But even on their official tax returns, even on income, the richest Americans are paying less. According to the IRS, the top 1% of Americans pay about 27% of their income in taxes. But the top 10th of 1%, that's people who make $35 million a year, pay less than 26%. And the top 1,000th of a percent, the absolute richest, pay less than 24%. In other words, past a certain point, the richer you are, the less you pay. That's why billionaires back socialism. It doesn't cost them much. Dana Perino hosts the Daily Briefing with Dana Perino. She's also coming on later in the show on Final Exam with Greg Gutfeld. But for now, Dana, you're going to get him. I'm rooting for you, as you know.
Thank you.
Don't tell him. There is this really interesting dynamic where the party, the Democratic Party, is becoming openly socialist in some cases, but certainly embracing economic populism, but it's still funded by the richest segment of our society. How does that work?
It is pretty interesting. And actually, to have Bernie Sanders launch his campaign in the week after basically another fellow Democratic socialist chased Amazon out of New York City, it put Bernie Sanders to the left of Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo. It's not easy to do that. In some ways, I feel like Bernie has been a victim of his own success. He has won this war without even firing a shot. In 2016, he basically said, this is what I'm going to be for. He ran unabashedly on it, and he had a lot of support. And I think if the Democrats hadn't rigged their primary, he might have actually been the nominee. Perhaps good for him that he wasn't, because then he had time to let these ideas percolate. Do you think there would be an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in 2020 or 2019 if there had not been a Bernie Sanders in 2016?
No, it's a good point.
Absolutely not. And also, the other thing you have is you have Democratic candidates like Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren both taking great pains this week to say that they are not socialists. They are capitalists, and they have to